Welcome, everyone, to the webcast series, The Public Health Insider. My name is Casey Farm, and I'm the Director of Alumni Relations for the College of Public Health and Human Sciences. I am delighted to introduce the moderator for today's episode, Making the Outdoors Accessible for Everyone, a novel partnership. This is the second webcast of our third season of the Public Health Insider series. We have one more episode for this season on Tuesday, March 2nd. You can register for this upcoming episode and catch up on previous episodes from every season that we've done at osualum.com/public health webcasts. A couple of logistical items for today. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you will see a Q&A chat button. You are welcome to type questions at any point in time during the talk, and at the end of the presentation, our panelists will answer as many as they possibly can. Our webcast series is hosted by the OSU Alumni Association in collaboration with the OSU Foundation, the College of Public Health and Human Sciences, and the OSU Center for Health Innovation. We are very excited that we get to continue to do this series for its third iteration surrounding public health, what it is, why it's important, and how it applies to our lives, the lives of the people that we care about, and our collective communities. For more information on public health and all of the other incredible work the college is doing, including about all the things about the human sciences, please visit health.oregonstate.edu. Now on to today's moderator, who introduced today's topic, and our panelists. Our series moderator is Dr. Allison Myers. She is the director of the OSU Center for Health Innovation within the college. The center serves as a connector between external organizations and Oregon State University faculty in the discovery of innovative solutions to pressing health and wellness issues, and builds workforce capacity in public health and human sciences. In service to meeting the most pressing public health needs in the state of Oregon, the center is home to projects related to the COVID-19 response, including Trace OSU and Trace Community, mental health promotion and substance use prevention in rural Oregon, and improving food security for Oregon Health Plan members through store-based changes. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce and turn the webcast over once again to Dr. Allison Myers. Dr. Myers, wonderful to have you here. Thanks for hosting as always, and I turn it over to you.
Hi, Casey. Hi, everyone. The very first thing I did when we started the webinar was to go to the participant list and warm greetings to those of you who are coming back for the second, fourth, eighth time. We're really glad to see you. I can't believe it. This is the 8th gathering of the Public Health Insider. So again, a warm welcome to our new listeners and warm greetings to those of you who are returning to spend time with us today. We are all on Zoom a lot. This is not your average Zoom meeting. I'd like to invite each of you who are tuning in today to join me as we take a minute, welcome, get comfortable where you're sitting, be sure your coffee or tea is at the ready. Particularly appropriate as we speak today about outdoor recreation and the health benefits of being outdoors, we want to start by acknowledging the land on which many of us are sitting today. Oregon State University in Corvallis is located within the traditional homelands of the Marys River Band of Kalapuya. Following the Willamette Treaty of 1855, Kalapuya people were forcibly removed to reservations in Western Oregon. Today, living descendants of these people are part of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians. As I was preparing for our time together this afternoon, I was reflecting back on the very early days of the Public Health Insider series last summer, when Dr. Victor Boberg introduced us all to public health and epidemiology fundamentals, sharing the mission of public health to create conditions for health, really, and our college vision for lifelong health and well-being for everyone. We also had, and this was back over the summer, we had Dr. Carrie Lynn Sakuma talk to us about promoting health equity and dismantling the societal systems that advantage some and disadvantage others. It's that systemic disadvantage or systematic disadvantage that results in less opportunity for well-being over the life course. I mention all of this really as a preface to our topic today. We're still meeting virtually, right? We're here by Zoom. Today, as we record this, is February 16th, 2021. The COVID-19 pandemic is ongoing, though we're making progress and there's hope, it feels like, at least for me, I'll say that, as one public health practitioner out of many. But we still very much have our work boots on. And in this season 3 of the Public Health Insider, we're reflecting and we're making meaning and we're thinking about, as we emerge from the pandemic and as we reflect on the disparities that have been shown to us in no uncertain terms, how will we reboot? How will we re-energize? And how will we start to fix the inequities that we see in access to health and well-being across the country? One of the ways that we can do that is by making the outdoors accessible for everyone. And that is our topic for today. So today we're showcasing a novel partnership. And this is where all of my co-presenters, our panelists today, Erwin, Lee, and Josh, I invite you to turn your cameras on. Today we're showcasing a novel partnership that was developed between several entities at Oregon State University, the Outdoor Recreation Economy Initiative, the Adventure Leadership Institute, our College of Public Health and Human Sciences, and AARP, our nation's largest nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to empowering people to choose how they live as they age. So let's get into it. I'm going to introduce our panelists in the order that they're speaking, and we're all going to say a little something. I'll chime in as we go between presenters, and then we'd like to leave plenty of time for discussion and question and answer. First, we have Lee Davis, Lee Wave, Executive Director of the Outdoor Recreation Economy Initiative at Oregon State University. Thanks for being here, Lee.
Sure.
We also have Dr. Erwin Tan, Director of Thought Leadership at AARP. Hi, Erwin. We're glad you're here.
Yes, please call me Erwin.
And third, we have Josh Norris, Director of the Adventure Leadership Institute at Oregon State University. Hi, Josh.
Hi, glad to be here.
I am going to turn it over to Lee to get started, to start to shape the story of the partnership. To do that, I'm going to have to share my screen, so bear with me, you all. And Lee, when this is up and running, I'm going to mute myself and turn it over to you. Just let me know when you want me to advance the slides.
Okay, thanks very much, Allison. Hi, everybody. My name is Lee Davis. I'm the Executive Director of Oregon State University's Outdoor Recreation Economy Initiative. Prior to coming to OSU, I was the Executive Director of the Mazamas, which is a nonprofit mountaineering and education organization based in Portland, Oregon, very similar to the Appalachian Mountain Club or the Colorado Mountain Club or the Mountaineers up in Seattle. And at the end of my time there at the Mazamas, I got very involved in public policy work and advocating for the outdoor recreation economy and the movement to make outdoor recreation accessible to all people across the country. And through that work, ended up starting to talk to a variety of people at Oregon State University, at our several of our colleges, and at our Extension and Engagement Division, and eventually decided to come over to OSU to help address the workforce needs of the recreation economy and to see what we could do about changing the workforce. And I'll get into why the workforce is so important to equitable access in just a minute here. So next slide. This project was created because of some relationship building that we did in 2018 and 19. The work we're doing for the recreation economy is tied very closely to industry associations, most of which are housed in Washington, D.C. And myself and my colleague Meredith Morris were in Washington, D.C. working with the Outdoor Recreation Roundtable and talking to leaders at the Department of Labor and the Senate about the importance of the recreation economy. And Jessica Turner at the Outdoor Recreation Roundtable said, that I should take a meeting and go talk to Erwin over at AARP because they had some questions about inclusivity and equity in the outdoor recreation economy. So we went over there and had a great initial meeting, and it really opened our eyes to something that I think the industry was missing for years, actually, which the root of it is that the outdoor industry at large is very aware of the equity and inclusivity problems, the barriers that a lot of people face to getting outdoors, and sort of the harsh reality that that the outdoors is a wonderful form of medicine for our mental and physical health and for community building and the development of conservation values and all of that, but not everybody has access to it. And one way I described that first meeting was Erwin effectively saying, hey, it seems like the outdoor industry is aware of inequities and wants to work on it, but it seems like you're not really talking about age disparities. And so is there something we could do together towards that end? And that was really sort of the genesis of this project. And we've learned a lot over the course of the last year and a half working with Erwin and AARP about the longevity economy, and he's going to talk to you a little bit more about that today. And through the academic research that we've done with Allison and her team in the College of Public Health and Human Sciences, we've learned a ton about the benefits of health in the outdoors and some of the competencies that we think are necessary for the future workforce to make the outdoors accessible to all people. Next slide. The project team that I lead is called the Outdoor Recreation Economy Initiative. It was formed at the end of 2018 by Oregon State University. And what we're dedicated to is providing intentionally inclusive programs to help people get new and better jobs in the outdoor recreation economy. I've got a 4-person core team. It's myself, Meredith Morris, who does industry engagement for us, Paula Matano, who's our program manager, and Danny Powers, our instructional designer. Next slide. The first thing that people hesitate on and get confused about is what exactly is the outdoor recreation economy. One of the first things to understand is that a significant portion, close to half of the dollars measured within the recreation economy are related to travel and tourism. So when you go on a trip and you buy gas and food and Cliff Bars and whatever else you might need on your way, all of that is counted. The recreation economy also is not just gear companies like Patagonia or the North Face or Bass Pro Shops. In the private sector alone, we've got manufacturing companies, retail companies, service providers, tour guides, outfitters, and all of that. And then in the public sector, we have everything from large federal agencies like the National Park Service and the Forest Service that manage public lands across America, to state agencies like Oregon State Parks and Recreation, to city and county park services like Metro Parks and Nature here in Portland, Oregon, and even community economic development entities that are working on ensuring everybody has green space and access to nature at their doorstep. And then finally, in the nonprofit sector, we have advocacy groups, trade associations like the ones I've mentioned before, service corps and youth corps that work on our public lands to conserve them. And we also have a huge number of community groups like the one I used to lead called the Mazamas, but also, now probably in the hundreds of significant community groups that are representing communities of people of color and advocating for all people to get outside in America. Next slide. So in the work that we do, we think about the workforce problem of the outdoor recreation economy, and workforce problems can be looked at in a sort of supply-demand framework. On the demand side, this is where the numbers start to become surprising. We're talking about an industry that nationally is 5.2 million jobs and comprises 2.1% of GDP in America. So it's an industry that's larger than oil and gas, it's larger than mining, larger than pharmacy, actually. And 5.2 million jobs is 3.3% of all employment in America right now. And that effectively means that in the aggregate, it's certainly not geographically even or, and there are disparities throughout this, but in general, in the aggregate, we're talking about an industry where 1 or 2 children in almost every classroom in America are likely to be working in this industry in the future. So there's an enormous amount of job demand, hundreds of thousands of new jobs opening up every year in this economy. And then on the supply side, you've got jobs with purpose, jobs that help people, sort of relate their passion and love of place and love of the outdoors to their work. So these are jobs with purpose. They enable people to live often in beautiful places that most of us only get to vacation in, and to work for companies that more and more every day are working towards triple bottom line metrics and trying to make the world a better place. So what we found through our work, though, is that even though there's a large demand side issue here and a large supply side, there really aren't very consistent or equitable or inclusive pathways to jobs in this economy. So unlike healthcare or engineering, where there are job titles and aligned certifications and degrees that we all know, that your children all know about to help you get jobs in those industries, this industry is one that just doesn't have those things set up yet. Next slide. And one of the reasons I'm really proud to be doing this work at Oregon State University is that we already have a large set of assets in the degree space and in the non-credit space to help support this economy. So through our College of Forestry and College of Agriculture, we have degrees in natural resources, environmental science, and sustainability. We also have business degrees in hospitality management, tourism, recreation, and adventure leadership out of the College of Forestry, the Adventure Leadership Institute that Josh on our panel today is running, and Oregon's Outdoor School program, which is incredibly innovative and helps every 5th or 6th grader in the state spend a week outside learning STEM, curriculum and spending a little bit of time outdoors. So, and then on the product side, we have an outdoor products degree in the initiative I'm running that's starting to build non-credit technical and leadership programs for the recreation economy. Next slide. So when we put this project together, we partnered with AARP and several employees that work with Erwin in DC and at the Oregon office of AARP, and partnered with the College of Public Health and Human Sciences and Allison's team to identify research and education programming opportunities dedicated to making the outdoors more accessible and welcoming to the 50+ community. We were able to bring a number of our academic expertise forward and set out really to understand a couple of things that I think Allison's going to get to in just a minute here. The first was really deeply understanding what are the health benefits of outdoor recreation to adults over 50. And then the workforce tie-in here is we wanted to understand what are the core competencies that front-facing employees in the outdoor recreation economy needed to be working better with people over 50, to understand their needs better and to service those needs better. I think it's off to Allison now. So
it is. We're about to turn it over to Erwin to hear about his perspective from AARP and thought leadership. Lee, thank you so much for setting the stage. It really, I learn something every time we talk. Which, by the way, all of this entire project, this whole partnership has been remote. I'm thinking about that, Erwin, I've never met you in person. And Josh, I don't think I've even ever met you in person, but we've been in more than a dozen meetings together over the course of a year. I want to say one thing for our listeners. It really helps me. I'm not someone who spends a ton of time outdoors. And it really helps me when you talk about the workforce to think about healthcare, right? How we really know what the jobs are. We know what the credentials are. We know what the training is. We know sort of how you move up these professional ladders. It's helpful for me to think about how that doesn't yet exist for outdoor recreation and how part of this is crafting it, right? Crafting that sort of matrix or grid or however we want to describe it. And then also layering on that thought about, we're change makers here, right? We're talking about a current workforce to something new and different over time. So thank you for that. I am going to stop talking. And Erwin, I see you've unmuted yourself. I'm going to advance the slides for you.
Allison, thank you. And Lee, thank you as well. It's been a great, great working with you all and an opportunity to think about aging and health in new ways. So I work for AARP, where as Lee mentioned, or as mentioned earlier, that our nation's largest nonprofit. We're nonpartisan. We have 38 million members, and we represent Americans 50 and older, including myself. I turned 50 last year. And as our CEO likes to say, 50 is the new 50. And what that means is that the first number is your age. The second one is how society views your age. And I think what we have to consider is that that we need to change how society views that that age. People are living and aging longer, and one of the things that we've done is try to see the impact of that through the Longevity Economy Report, which is something that a colleague of mine who's an economist published about a year ago. And it talks about how, as someone who's in Gen X, I turned 50 last year. The first millennials turned 50 in 2031, and the first of the Gen Z population in 2047. So as you look out from now until 2050, we see rapidly aging America, but also if you think about aging, if you think that as if 50 is the new 50, what we have to do is reimagine that. And last year, as part of my bucket list, and bucket list is I think shorthand for things you want to do in your lifetime, especially as you get older. I wanted us as a family. I have 2 younger children and a wife. We went to the Grand Canyon. We did some outdoor recreation, and it was on so as we talk about the impact of 50 plus, it was my desire to go to the Grand Canyon that generated this entire trip. So that's what, as an example of how the 50 plus has a dramatic impact on the overall employment by driving a lot of consumer demand. And not only that, it's all about federal taxes, state, local taxes, and these are more important than ever now. We find ourselves in this pandemic, and also these are the same pools of money that support state level education, like Oregon State University, and our public lands as well. As was mentioned earlier, it's the 50 plus population contributed 8.3 trillion in economic activity, and this will increase to 26.8 trillion in 2050. In terms of the societal benefits, so in a previous job, I was faculty at Johns Hopkins, where I studied the health benefits of volunteering. This was a very specific type of volunteering. We asked people 55 and older to volunteer in the Baltimore City public school system as quarter-time AmeriCorps members, and it was a randomized controlled trial. We saw that the women who volunteered were more likely to walk, and the men who volunteered were more likely to exhibit continued brain health, as shown by MRIs 2 years later as compared to controls. And the nice thing about this was that this was an intrinsic motivator, right? It wasn't something that you forced people to do. People wanted to do that, and that's what volunteering and that's what outdoor recreation represent. They represent intrinsic motivators to healthy lifestyles. And the fact that outdoor recreation, it's not that you have to pay people to do it. In fact, they're willing to pay you for it. And that's the entire conversation about the outdoor economy. So if you consider the benefit of volunteering, you think about people who are trail guides or docents or volunteer in multiple ways. It's 745 billion. And then in terms of unpaid activities, a total of 9 trillion in terms of total contribution. So for all these reasons, I think that there is a great potential in outdoor recreation to create healthy options for Americans. The question is accessibility. And I think what's exciting about this partnership is that this is a partnership that exists across different sectors. We're talking about a nonprofit like AARP. We're talking about state institutions like OSU, and then we're talking about the industry itself. And that is where I think we're going to be able to make headway by working cross-sector. I have a lot to say about health benefits, but I'm going to pause and turn it back to Allison. And I'd love to hear more about the Venture Academy.
Awesome. Let's keep going. Erwin, that's a really wonderful introduction. And I think yes, we're rethinking about what it means to turn 50. And if anyone else like me is counting whether they're a millennial or a Gen Z, anyway, we'll talk about when I turn 50 later. A little interlude here. I'm going to break the role of moderator for a minute and be a presenter very briefly. I met Lee as he was getting started, and in my role as director of the Center for Health Innovation, together with Norm Horde, who was a school head in our college at the time. We've pulled together this team to be able to do a couple of things that together Josh and I are going to tell you about. But I want to make sure we thank John Shuna, who worked a ton, is our main analytic partner on this, Sabrina Pillai, a doctoral student, and Siu Sun Wang. They couldn't be with us today, but we want to make sure we thank them as we describe the College of Public Health and Human Sciences pieces of the work. We really set out to do three things as a research partner to Lee. One of them was to make sure we were all clear on the health benefits of nature contact, of being outdoors. And we started our first sort of deliverable as we worked out the project was a literature review of these health benefits. And suffice it to say, that's been done. There is just a ton of evidence about how great it is to be outdoors. There's a laundry list on the screen. I'll give a couple of examples: reduced stress, better sleep, improved mental health, even lower blood pressure, improved pain control, improved immune function. So the health benefits are really remarkable. After that, we really set out to understand, okay, great. If we know the benefits, then who's getting them and who isn't? And the second part of our project at the college was to analyze 4 years of behavioral risk factor surveillance system data. This is a nationally representative data set of adults. And this is with John and Sabrina's help. We did the analytics to understand, if you look at older adults, so ages 50 and over, males and females, this is a biological sex variable, so some limitations there. And then race and ethnicity. If you crunch all those numbers and want to understand who's doing what we've learned preliminarily, and this is hot off the press, are things that, you know, quite frankly, we're finding support for hypotheses for what we know to be evident. We're seeing what we think is playing out in the world reflected in the data. So that's a good thing. But what we know are that males are outside, getting physical activity outside more frequently than our females. We also know that more males are using equipment in their outdoor physical activity than females are using equipment. We're finding that the oldest adults, so those that are 80 and over, are expectedly outdoors less than adults, say, in the 50, 60, or 70-year-old range. And this is a real kicker that we're going to start to focus our conversation on how we solve this. Most minority, racial, and ethnic groups are less likely to participate in equipped outdoor physical activities. They're also less likely to be getting any physical activity at all. And there are interactions that exist between all of this. So stay tuned. There'll be a lot more of a splash about this in the future. Stay with us and follow us on social media if you'd like to get more of these findings. But the bottom line here is that we see disparities. They're reflected in the longitudinal data sets. With that, I want Josh to tell us about his role in the project, and specifically about the answers to our next big question. Once we know that some folks aren't benefiting from being in the outdoors, how then do we train the workforce? What would that next step be?
Yeah, thanks, Allison. And I would just say, for starters, you know, this was a pretty big and monumental project in a lot of ways. There's a lot of information to sift through, and additionally, as we were using, some of the, you know, various realms began to overlap. And so my good friend Siu Sun and I began to look at what would core competencies in general be for a workforce, and specifically not just the workforce that is current, but for the workforce that we believe the future calls for. And so I think that's an interesting delineation between the two. You can tell that we went through one of the processes after we came up with a sketch or two, was to go and actually try it on with people that we were specifically looking for, with the help of Lee. and Erwin trying to get connected with people that we felt like would know what the future would hold and would know what the pain points of the current and the past has been. And so, through that, I would just say two things happened. One, we found both affirmation in the core competencies and revelation. So both of those things were happening at the same time. So it was a pretty interesting and strong response. Most people that we talked to, actually, there wasn't a single person that we talked to that wasn't very fired up by this subject. And so I find that really telling, not only about the industry, but about those individuals as well, and about the amount of buy-in we have to accomplish some of the changes that we're hoping to accomplish. And I think you can pretty much, if you go to the next slide there, Allison, you can divide any of these into, or all of these into 3 domains. And, we called the first one personal effectiveness domain. And you can imagine some of those things that are in there are probably not unfamiliar to you if you've been looking at a highly effective person or a highly effective team. And then we called the second one workplace competencies, so things that need to occur, just how to be in that organization, whether it was an agency or a retailer or even an outfitter or even a governmental entity or even a nonprofit. And then finally, academic competencies. So we just knew certain pieces of it had to be, you had to have a basis, so to speak, in order to get your head around certain other pieces. And so they all fit together. And we're looking forward to what it means to try and figure out not only a curriculum for putting this forward, like where do you go with this long list of competencies, but how to put together a curriculum, but then also how to put together a roadmap through that curriculum, like a way forward for people that want to possibly jump between different parts of the outdoor recreation economy, which hasn't yet been accomplished in the past, but also a real transparent and easy way to invite people into that. If you want to change, some of those intersections we had talked about, there has to be a way in. And so I think that's the future for these competencies as we see them.
It helps if I unmute myself. Thanks so much, Josh. I stopped sharing my screen because I feel like it's time for us really to go back to this or go towards the conversational part of this with the 3 of you all as panelists. This is also when I'd invite participants, folks who are listening in, to add their questions to the Q&A. I think the question that I'd like to ask all of you, and I'd love to hear from all of you, is why Oregon State? I mean, Lee, you gave some comments, of course, about how we have all of that it takes in terms of the colleges, and there's some product focus, but then I also think about but there are lots of stakeholders all over, and so maybe each of you could talk about the unique offering. Why you're in it, what makes your heart sing about this work, and maybe that'll even translate to some comments about what this could look like in the future. So why OSU, and what's our direction of movement?
Should I start?
Yeah.
I think there's a number of reasons why OSU. I mean, the normal quick response is that in the 20th century, society viewed the highest value use of our public lands and waters through an extraction lens. In other words, getting material out to build communities and society and economies across America was the real reason for having public lands, and recreation was sort of an afterthought. But in the 20th century, Oregon State University built a College of Forestry that is currently the leading College of Forestry in America and the second ranked in the world. And so for decades, basically, Oregon State University has thought of itself as an institution that is leading the way in helping people get natural resource-based jobs. the outdoor recreation economy is, and its growth and its recognition by the Bureau of Economic Analysis and by leaders all across America as being important to health and community and conservation and education is really rooted in the realization that society's come to, that the highest value use of public lands and waters in America is experiential, that the intersectoral benefits that we keep talking about around health and happiness and community building and interest in lifelong education and curiosity and all of the benefits that we were talking about there, that's that actual economic value and driver behind the outdoors. And so a part of why OSU is where this is happening is because the leadership of the university has chosen to invest in this and has chosen to take steps to help ensure that, like in the 20th century, in the 21st century, OSU continues to be a leader in helping people get jobs in the outdoors.
I also would like to think that our focus on doing the work regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion also makes OSU a prime fit. Josh, Erwin, do you all have thoughts on why OSU? You know, why put your heart with us? What are we going to do as a team that's unique?
Well, also you mentioned heart, so I will say that my wife grew up in Corvallis, Oregon, so that alone is reason enough. But I think from what Lee talked about, the realization that a transition in the economy, and not only a transition in the economy, but your interest in developing the workforce. AARP has been working with the World Economic Forum about the future of work, and this realization that there will be a time in the present and the future, we will have 5 generations working in the same in the workforce at the same time, and how we can integrate the strengths that every generation brings and allow people to continue to work for as long as they desire to or need to. That is one of our priorities. And so to have the ability to, as you described, sort of retrain oneself and develop a career ladder, a new career ladder, I think is very exciting, especially as we consider that a lot of jobs are under pressure from automation. So for all those reasons, we're interested in this. The other reason, obviously, also is the connection between health and outdoor recreation. Now, at a time of the COVID-19 pandemic, physical activity is more important than ever. It's important for our physical and mental health. And one of the things I'm sure we'll talk about is access to the great outdoors is a gateway to a healthier lifestyle for all Americans.
Yeah, and I would just say I'm at OSU not by any accident. I love the idea of our Landgrant Mission and how it fully is embedded in the work that we're talking about. It actually calls and demands that of us. And I love the fact that we have classrooms that regularly, we have students from completely different backgrounds and localities sitting next to each other, having to reconcile their difference in viewpoints and then still face off with some of the data together. I think that's a great way in which our world is. And then specifically, I would just say it's often been said that access to the outdoors may in fact be the last unclaimed civil right of the United States of America. And I feel an obligation to be a part of trying to be whatever I can be to shepherd that along. And I think that's exactly the kind of work that we're talking about doing here.
I want to be sure that we focus on access, and Josh, you talked earlier before we started live, you shared a story. I want to come back to that, but we've got 2 questions in the chat, and this one I'm going to come to Erwin and Josh. You all can decide who's on deck first, but thank you, Kristen, for your question. I'm curious to hear more about workforce training needs particular to 50-plus-year-old clientele. Who wants to take that first?
I'm happy to take a stab. I think that if we think about this idea of the 5-generation workforce, what's exciting is that every generation brings something important to the workplace, and that we have to support all of that. In my previous, before I joined AARP, I worked for the Corporation for National Community Service, which is the federal entity that manages AmeriCorps and Senior Corps. I directed the Senior Corps side. And we saw national service volunteers of different ages working and thinking of one model, Jumpstart, where you had college students and Senior Corps volunteers working. The college students came with the energy; they were able to get down on their knees and work with the kids who were in pre-K, and Senior Corps volunteers would sit there and tell the young kids what to do, and the young kids would do what they were told by these older Senior Corps volunteers. And together, the energy and the emotional wisdom of both generations was important. And I think that there's an opportunity for people when they go into a retail store or an outdoor opportunity to see themselves by race, gender, age, ethnicity. Those are important parts. One of the things I think we'll talk about is this issue of how people need to feel invited. And so part of that also is not only the issue of training the older adults to be there as workers, but also other generations to see the older adult consumers as also potential consumers and worthy of attention as well.
Yeah, I'm remembering from Josh, I'm coming to you. I'm remembering from the interviews that we did with folks from industry about, what is it that you want the workforce to know? And so much of it was that you need to take every customer seriously, and be sure that you're sort of aware of your own implicit bias, right? What are you showing up with when a particular customer comes in the door? I'm thinking about my own experience buying running shoes, and the first thing that comes out of my mouth is, I'm not a real runner, and like, oh, not really. And then how does the salesperson interact with me because of that? Josh, you've got something to add, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's so deep, right, to talk about insider, outsider, and what that, what the identity of certain spaces are, especially even like you both were just talking about retail spaces even. And I think one of the things that was really promising about the conversations that we had that you were alluding to, Allison, were lots and lots of people in those spaces knew that to get away with selling you whatever this particular time was not worth losing you to this endeavor. And so we had lots and lots of people in the industry discussing they were in it for the long haul. And I think that's a really important perspective when we talk about workplace competencies. And it doesn't really matter what age to have some wisdom about what that means over time, right? For me to really get this right, to understand who you are and what you need, different than to make, whatever, a $3 commission or whatever we're afraid might be a sinister or less effective payout in the end. And so I would say there was promising discussion around that from a lot of these leaders. And the real question is, how do you build that then into a competency? So yeah, we can talk about the desire of some of those things, but when we talk about workplace competencies, well, let's start with the same thing that worked for you 30 years ago may need to be done differently depending on what role you're in, or it's exactly what's called for, wisdom. And so helping our various people through those competencies understand the difference between that. Those are some of the things that come to mind.
Lee, were you going to chime in, or should we go to this next question? They're stacking up here. So
yeah, I was going to say, we're so many questions. Let's keep moving. So
I love it. I'm starting to feel the pressure. Send your questions. Okay. From Jill, how do we define outdoor activities? Does it mean traveling somewhere for an activity, or does it include your own neighborhood and yard? Let's talk about it broadly and not with regard to the longitudinal analyses. So Lee, help us with that. How do you define outdoor experiences?
What matters is that people are spending outdoors actively in nature. The outdoor industry actually has a participation report that they publish every year, and close to home recreation, like you're describing, is absolutely a critical component to it. And I'm not a scientist, but I would gather that the majority of the health benefits that we're talking about from the outdoors are garnered through close to home experiences.
Anything to add on that?
Yeah, can I jump in? Yeah, because I think, yeah, Lee's exactly right. And one of the things that I think probably some of the holes for our society is to discover some of those places where we're missing that. You know, everything from, you know, a vacant lot at the end of your block, or what might have been disregarded at one point as a wetland for a neighborhood or a parking lot. Those types of spaces, it turns out, and there have been a few studies around what they call a greenness score or a naturalness score, in which they give different amounts of tree cover, different values, and using some satellite imagery. And even there was one rural study in, I think it was in New York, rural New York, where they actually even gave higher scores for certain households by the amount of houseplants that were inside. And so it's a broad interpretation. And to Erwin's point earlier, we see certain activities not even yet fully cataloged. And that's one of the pieces of future, right? Like, we know that our older adults sometimes have experiences that are in fact immersing them in green spaces or natural spaces, and wouldn't yet be qualified as depending on who gets to make the definition of the recreation.
Let's talk about measures. And this is where I'm going to ask you to share the story about angling, Josh. And I'll just start by saying, you know, with regard to the behavioral risk factor surveillance system, that's a data set that folks who study health promotion or health behavior regularly use to understand sort of the state of things in the US. And the measures that we were able to use for this particular analysis, they are the best available, at least from a nationally representative perspective. And, you know, we really are talking about, hold on, Lee. We really are talking about equipment, like, are you using equipment other than your shoes or not? So those definitions are very narrow and prescribed. But what that doesn't take into account are the stories like the one that you shared on about outdoor recreation and angling. Maybe tell us that one.
Yeah, well, we were just discussing before we started, and Erwin, feel free to jump in here as well. But, you know, there are plenty pieces of the story that haven't yet been, that aren't readily recognized. So, for example, we talk about there are various indigenous and immigrant groups that have for time immemorial been anglers, meaning it is very much a part of who they are, their identity. And that's even, you know, Erwin had brought up subsistence angling as well, right, as a part of that. But that's an example. Those populations, or at least that money, isn't yet showing up in ways that people have identified in places like Bass Pro Shops or other things. And ergo, they've been written out of that story about the rec because they're not showing up by those measures like you're talking about, which just means we're missing some of those measures. And that's what yeah, I think part of the future holds.
Yeah, it's why you have a research partnership, right? It's why you have measurement folks on your team. Let's go to another question, and this is for Lee. Thank you, Connor. He says, I'm a member of the Chemeketans, an outdoor group in Salem with a very similar history to the Mazamas, albeit a slightly different present iteration. He says, if I had to guess, I'd say that the mean age of the Chemeketans is well over 50. And I think that the social club model that the Chemeketans Club uses is starting to fade in favor of more informal meetup type groups. How do you see clubs like this adapting to the landscape of the outdoor recreation industry in the future?
That's a super complicated question, but the couple of things. One thing, Connor, I would recommend, or to anyone, if you haven't read a book called Bowling Alone, I would highly recommend that, which is about sort of the death of community organizations in America over the last 50 to 60 years. And in sort of the interest of time, I would say, Connor, you're certainly welcome to email me or give me a call at any point, and my information will be, I'm sure, shared after this. But my very quick answer is that if clubs want to remain relevant, they need to intentionally and quickly shift their fundamental mission and purpose away from membership, which is an inherently exclusive concept where you're directing your resources towards those who are actively engaged in the organization, and shift the mission of the organization to something that's purpose-based. What we did at the Mazamas was we shifted to a vision of everyone loving and enjoying the mountains and protecting the mountains. And so, so trying to rethink the purpose of these clubs and shift them more towards a nonprofit advocacy sort of space, and which doesn't mean all the activities in education and all that need to change necessarily, but that the attitude and the reason that you're doing it changes.
Thanks so much, Lee. Another late breaking question in the Q&A that's excellent. And Erwin, I'm going to come to you for this. Will this program only target those 50 plus, or will it expand to include everyone, like those who might be a minority population or those with disabilities? So let's have Erwin respond first, and then Josh and Lee, maybe you want to chime in as well.
Yeah, I think the issue of universal design, I think, is applicable here. Curb cuts that are useful for people with mobility problems are also useful for people pushing strollers. And I think that what we're particularly interested is in that issue of intersectionality between race and age. When I was at Johns Hopkins in that study looking at older adult volunteering, we realized that one of the AmeriCorps requirements to volunteer in schools was a high school education. But then if you did the subtraction and realized that the volunteers that we had in Baltimore City grew up at a time when there was only one high school in all of Baltimore that accepted Black students, right? And so as you think about, I was just listening to a podcast, Hidden Brain from NPR, by a professor by the name of Claude Steele, who does work on stereotype threat. The idea of how we respond when we are affected by stereotypes. He talked about his own experience growing up when they had to go over to the town next door to go swimming at a pool, and the pool was only available for Black people one day a week. And so when he thinks of outdoor recreation, as a person who's older, who's also Black, he's thinking of his own personal experiences. So I think that I think the key is, if we want equity, we need not only to have, we need to go beyond equal access and think about, specific outreach to make sure that everyone feels welcome. And there are some great groups out there who do just that. Thinking of, Girl Trek that does actually recreates the march that Harriet Tubman did from the Eastern Shore of Maryland to freedom. And so incorporate different aspects of history to make people realize that they are also, people of the outdoors and are welcome. So I think I agree that the issue about focusing on increasing access means also helping industry realize that this is a tremendous opportunity, and that it takes a cross-sector approach. Back to you, Allison.
Sure, thanks, Erwin. I'm starting to feel the pressure of it approaching 5 o'clock. We've got about 7 minutes left. Thank you, listeners, for these fantastic questions. And I think we've mostly addressed the ones that into during registration. So I want us to put our sort of visionary, aspirational hats on, all three of you. And Erwin, you joined AARP last year. Josh, Lee, I have no idea whether you all are members or when you will join. I myself, it's going to be, what is it, 2030, 2028? I don't know, something like that. But think about the medium to longer term, and you all are sort of looking back and you're remembering the very beginning sprouts, seeds of this project. What do you think outdoor recreation and healthy longevity and health benefits of the outdoors and equity, what will we be saying then? And let's establish an order. Let's go to Erwin, and then Lee, and then Josh.
So AARP this year started a 10-year program looking at disparities. So we're talking about racial, ethnic disparities, as well as gender and sexual orientation disparities as well, on top of the aging that we've discussed. My hope is that in the 10 years that we have ahead of us, that we are able to prepare for a much more diverse American population that is aging. And aging is not easy always, but it beats the alternative, and it also represents a tremendous opportunity for our country and for outdoor recreation. So I think that it's really important now as we consider the need for outdoor recreation at a time when we're all locked down from COVID-19. We are all desperate for increased physical activity, for improved mental health that comes from that, from the opportunity to socialize safely. And that's what outdoor recreation represents today. But if we can address these disparities here today in outdoor recreation and across all sectors, we have the potential not to go back to where we were in 2019, but improve our country and potentially achieve equity so that everyone has the opportunity to live the way they want to do as they age.
Thanks, Erwin. I think, in the future, looking back on this work, for me, the grand thing here would be if we could really address the barriers to accessing jobs in the recreation economy and fundamentally changing the foundational knowledge and competencies that underlie those with an inclusivity lens. So, which is the work that I'm doing, but it's going to take an extremely long time to complete. So, yeah, if I want to give a quick shout out to Dan Little, who's the first gentleman of Oregon. He's the governor's husband, who's worked for several years here on cataloging and understanding the barriers to outdoor recreation for communities of color. And I've been working with him for most of those years on that project, and along with a number of amazing advocates across Oregon and the Northwest. And there's a ton of work to do, but Oregon's really, really vibrantly pursuing it.
Yeah, that's great, Lee. And to build on that, my aspirations, and y'all are probably just call me a dreamer, but my aspirations is that all of those things end up yielding a noticeable difference. And I mean that like a visible difference, not just when you're in outdoor spaces, but then beyond that, if like for example, if I'm inviting my friends that come from different backgrounds or are people of color to go skiing with me, that they don't have to contemplate, like, are the communities that I have to travel through to get there, are they going to be safe for me? What happens if my car breaks down, or can I stop for an espresso? Or conversations like that. I hope that those things, my aspirations, those things are gone because of this work here, that it changes the whole makeup of the outdoor recreation economy. Thus, it no longer becomes an anomaly or something to have to entertain it. So that's my aspirations.
I love it. You all are wonderful. We're don't want to go back to where we were pre-COVID. A ton of work to do, and we're vibrantly pursuing it and actively looking towards community where everyone feels safe and loved and has access to health and well-being. Thank you all so much. I want to say one thing before I turn it over to Casey, who will close this out, and that is, if you are interested in this work, please reach out. It is going to take a village. It takes all of us. Lee, you've been remarkable at being inclusive and bringing teams together. Erwin, Josh, thank you for everything. And if you're listening and you hear this and you feel like I want to do some of that, reach out. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, Allison, and thank you to our entire panel today for their time, work, and passion. Really, this is incredible work that, between the college and Oregon State University and our health partners, that we are very, very proud and excited to bring to you as part of the Public Health Insider Series.